You are listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast produced by Veteran Strategies and featuring conversations with fascinating and impactful men and women who have shaped our world, our communities, and our history. My name is Robert Vane, Principal of Veteran Strategies, and your host for our discussion. You are listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast presented by Veteran Strategies, a local veteran public relations enterprise, and sponsored by Girl Scouts of Central Indiana, Garmon Construction, Leaders and Legends LLC, the Grand Hall and Conference Center at Historic Union Station, the McGinley's Golden Ace Inn, and McAllister Machinery, your friendly neighborhood Caterpillar dealer. You may find all your sales and rental equipment needs at McAllister.com. We are pleased to announce our podcast is a member of the All Indiana Podcast Network in partnership with Wish TV. You may find Leaders and Legends at allindianapodcastnetwork.com. Thinking of starting a podcast or need to host a public meeting? Let Leaders and Legends LLC be your partner as you look for new ways to communicate your message. Please contact Chris Spangle and me at leadersandlegends.net. Thank you for joining us on the Leaders and Legends podcast. Our guest today is someone I always wanted to be, so much so that when I joined the Army in 1987, I was a broadcast journalist. That was my job because I wanted to be Roger Harvey. Roger, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast.
Great to be here. You almost sound convincing when you say that, Robert.
Well, if I limited my podcast guests just to people who wanted to be Roger Harvey, I would have a unlimited supply of suspects and subjects. You're one of the absolute best at what you do. Roger is a public affairs guru at Bose Public Affairs Group. There simply is nobody better at what I do than Roger Harvey, and I'm thrilled to talk to you.
Well, thank you, Robert. It's great to be here, and you do a tremendous job as well. I know a lot of times when we get together, we have interesting conversations about some of the issues we're dealing with clients, but that keeps us interesting, right?
Well, when did you get to WTHR? We're going to go back to where you grew up and how you got into broadcast journalism and why you and I are still Miami Dolphins fans after all these years of misery.
We're in therapy for that, yes.
When did you get to THR?
So I came to THR to Indianapolis back in 1995. Actually, it was the end of the year of 1995. And
the reason I ask is because one of my instructors at the Defense Information School worked part-time for THR, Jerry Lambert.
Okay. I know the name. Yeah. Yeah. I was real close to, in fact, I was in Richmond, Virginia at the time and was literally packing up, and I was moving to Philadelphia. Had an opportunity there, and my agent called and said, "Have you FedExed that contract yet?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Don't send it." And I said, "What do you mean don't send it?" He said, "You got to go talk to the station in Indianapolis. It's family owned. They do tremendous work. You know, they're going to send you everywhere." And I said, "Indianapolis?" And they said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, I knew there was a car race, but that's all I knew." And long story short, I came out here and the rest is history.
Did you ever Philadelphia is a big market. It's close to a lot of action. It's got a lot of issues, for lack of a better term. Did you ever kind of was like, man, did I make the right decision?
No, I mean, at first, obviously, you're looking at size of markets, and Philadelphia, is a huge market. I think at the time they were number four. And I'd already picked a place out on the main line, not far from Villanova, which is near where the TV stations are there. And so I came here. It's a 20 size market. And but the opportunity was because it was family owned, and that's a big deal because they spend the resources when it's a privately owned television station, and they were going to send me wherever I wanted to go in terms of covering big stories. And so that excited me, and that's the reason why I came here.
How quickly after you came here did you visit the Indianapolis Motor Speedway?
It was fairly soon after I was here. I think when I came here the first day, so that's another thing too, is, you start and it's like, go do a story. There was no There was no, they call it, consultants call it onboarding. No, there was none of that. It was like, you know how to do a story, go do a story. And the Colts were in the playoffs back then. And it was a big deal back in that 95, 96 season. They had a couple of really big years, if you remember.
The Harbaugh years, correct?
Yeah. On the road in Kansas City. And I think they were in Pittsburgh on the road. It was a couple exciting big playoff games.
As I recall, that was also one of the years that Marino threw the interception to Entman, who ran the ball all the way back for a touchdown. I was working as the night manager at the Holiday Inn Airport.
Okay.
I was in a room. I threw the remote out of the room. It landed in the pool. And my friends on the east side, because they're complete and total dicks, called the switchboard for 30 consecutive minutes. Finally, the switchboard operator goes, "You're just going to have to trade places with me and take these calls because I can't handle it anymore." I'm like, "What's the problem?" He goes, "All they're doing is calling and saying Dolphins and hanging up."
Very nice. If I'd have known you then, I probably would have been one of those 30, except I would have been commiserating with you because I remember that. I mean, we've had some lean years as Dolphin fans.
Do you think that Indianapolis is underrated as a news market? That, you know, there's that famous New Yorker cartoon where it's basically New York City and then it's takes up 90% of the map and then the rest is 10%. But right. Is there a little bit of bias towards Midwestern cities that aren't Chicago?
Absolutely. I mean, I think it crosses the gamut, not only just in news, but just in general. I remember when I'm from the East Coast, and when I said I was coming to Indianapolis, a lot of my friends were, "What are you doing? What are you doing out there?" And then over the years, as they would come visit me for various big sporting events and other things we were having, they realized, like, wow, this is really a neat city. And now, at the time I didn't have a family, but now, with raising a family, you really see the benefits of being in this city. And you do see a little bit of that, I think, in the news business. I remember there were times, especially when I would do stories for the national networks, there was a little bit of that. Okay, now which station are you with? You're out in Indianapolis at our affiliate. Is that kind of, this is big New York here talking to you.
Is that pervasive in the industry? I mean, it's not just Indianapolis. I mean, if it was Columbus, Ohio, or Kansas City, Kansas, or
yeah, wherever. No, it's not just Indianapolis. It's basically anything that's not in one of the big, I would say top 10 markets in the country, so, and it's not just the East Coast. I mean, LA has the same mindset, San Francisco, Atlanta. I mean, that's just where the big boys are. Right. And, everyone starts in these smaller markets and the mindset is if you're really good, you make it to a big market.
So if you had told your friends before you moved out here, not only am I matriculating to Indianapolis, but guess what? We're going to get to host a Super Bowl before New York City is going to get to host a Super Bowl, or East Rutherford, New Jersey. What would their reaction have been?
They wouldn't have believed me. And think about the Final Fours. I mean, we've had actually, for me personally, I went to school in North Carolina. I'm a Tar Heel, so there's not a lot of Tar Heels here in Indianapolis. But two big Final Fours that were hosted here were significant events for two of my coaches. Dean Smith coached his last game here in a Final Four, as did Bill Guthridge. And so there were just neat opportunities over the years with various sporting events, whether it was basketball or football.
You mentioned you grew up on the East Coast. We're talking with Roger Harvey, former WTHR reporter and now managing principal at Bose Public Affairs Group, strategic communicator par excellence. You grew up on the East Coast because your father had an amazing job and came up with one of the greatest advertising slogans of all time, which I remember as a kid. You told me the story when we were talking about the podcast. I'd love for you to tell it again in the context of how you grew up, how you ended up in Florida, and then basically how you ended up in North Carolina and decided to do TV as a living. I know that's kind of a giant set of questions, but I know you can be concise.
I will do my best. So I come from a broadcast family. My dad was a television advertising executive, And at the time, you either had to be in New York, LA, or Miami to do that. So this would have been in the 60s, early 60s. And my mother was a casting director. So she would pick the talent for the commercials. My dad would produce the commercials. So that's how they met. And one of his clients, he was fortunate. He had a lot of great clients. One of his clients was Timex watches. And the slogan you're referring to was "the takes a licking, keeps on ticking." And so they had a whole campaign of commercials that he was responsible for, where they had a gentleman by the name of John Cameron Swayze. And you can find these on YouTube. They're actually kind of funny watching them. And they would put the watches in various situations. So on motorboat propellers, on baseball bats of Mickey Mantle at Yankees practice or what have you. And "takes a licking, keeps on ticking" was the campaign. And so, growing up in my house, quite honestly, Robert, it was interesting that for me, what was usual as a member of my family is that when the commercials were on, we actually paid attention to the commercials, because my parents would sometimes argue about, "Oh, that's Carol Demas, the mom in the Tide commercial," or that's so, and I just thought that was the way things happen until I went over to a friend's house and no one watched the commercials. I thought, wait a minute, we should be paying attention. But in any event, so we got tired of living in New York City. I was born in the city, and my mom actually got tired of it. I was relatively young. I didn't have a say in it. And so we moved to South Florida, and he had a TV production company down there that's still in existence today, and did music videos back in the day with Miami Sound Machine with Gloria Estefan, and a bunch of different shows, Howdy Doody Show and so forth. And then I got involved, obviously being around them in television. I wanted to get into journalism. And so there's a tape around somewhere of me hosting the Noonie Robinson Show, which is the name of our high school football coach at South Plantation High School. Shout out to the Paladins in Fort Lauderdale. And so I did that, and then wanted to go to Carolina because they're journalism school. And that's how I got to North Carolina.
Did you go to high school with anyone famous? I'm thinking sports figures, because a lot of terrific athletes come out of South Florida.
Oh yeah, no, we had a bunch. There were a couple of folks that played in the NBA. Guy by the name of Reggie Cross played for the Philadelphia 76ers. Had some folks, a couple of pitchers in baseball, tennis player. Guy grew up with down the street, got as high as number 6 in the world in tennis. His son is on the PGA Tour right now, Daniel Berger. And then golf, another neighbor down the street played on the LPGA Tour for a while too. So yeah, it was a big sports area down there, and lots of athletes.
You mentioned your parents being in, quote unquote, in the business. Did they encourage you, or did they say, "There's a better way to make a living, Roger," or kind of neutral?
They were supportive, but it was much like that was same with sports. I played a lot of competitive sports, and they never pushed me in any direction. And they were supportive of me going into journalism, and they never once tried to steer me in a different direction. They were actually exactly how you would want to be raised in that regard.
Did you have a favorite sport you played? I think I know the answer, but I want to ask the question.
I did, yeah. So I was one of those kids. I played a bunch of different things. I'm a lefty, so baseball I pitched and played first. It's usually where they end up sticking the lefty. And then I played basketball, but tennis was my main sport that I played.
Do you ever hit around with somebody famous, a name we would recognize?
I have. A few folks. Probably the biggest name, and it was unintentional how it all came about. But I worked at the tennis club down there called Central Park, and they host the Orange Bowl, which is the big junior tennis tournament. So virtually every major professional player has played the Orange Bowl, and obviously many of them have won the Orange Bowl, from Federer to Yannick Noah to Arthur Ashe to Andy Roddick. I mean, go down the line, McEnroe. And anyway, I got to hit one year. There was a young kid from Germany coming over to play in the tournament, and he got over here before his playing partner got here. And so he shows up at the front desk at the club, and basically with some broken English said, "Hey, is there somebody around here to hit with?" And I said, "Yeah, I'll close up the pro shop and hit with you." And it was Boris Becker. So about a year and a half after I hit with him. He ended up winning Wimbledon. He was unseeded, and it was a crazy.
He's like
rocket ship
17
ride for
when
him.
he won Wimbledon, right? Like I think he was 17 when he won.
Yeah,
Wimbledon.
he was. Yeah, it was unbelievable. In fact, in the area, you talked about Holiday Inn. There's a Holiday Inn nearby, and when he won Wimbledon, I remember they put a sign up that said Boris Becker slept here. It was a big deal.
George Washington. So when you were hitting with him, did you get one by him or handcuff him, and then you see him a year later in Wimbledon going, I've already.
That was
done
so
that.
many years ago. What I do remember is that I thought he was good, but he did not win that tournament that weekend. I mean, there's just a lot of people really good at tennis. Same thing with golf, individual sports. It's about mentally at the end of the day, as it was explained to me at a young age, it's like you could take the number 1, number 2, number 10 player in the world and the number 1,000 player, and you put them next to each other. And same thing in golf. And you're like, wow, why is that guy that good? And that guy is struggling or hasn't made it. And it's all in the mindset. It's the guy that's number 100 in the world, Robert, he thinks he's going to hit the shot under pressure. The guy that's number 1 in the world knows he's going to hit the shot under pressure. And that's what it boils down to.
Did you get to cover, with all the amazing sporting events and sports that come to this city, I find myself, and this came up in a podcast actually not that long ago, I find myself missing the RCA tennis tournament.
Yes.
A lot. It was a terrific tournament for years. It was the clay court nationals or something in the 70s and maybe early 80s, and it switched to hard court. Connors was here. Sampras was here. I mean, big names. And it was voted like the best tournament 15 years in a row, 12 years in a row, or the entire ATP tour.
Right.
I guess we could ask Miles. Mark Miles would probably know. But, it went away because the Cincinnati tournament became so big as a tune-up to the U.S. Open. Did you get a chance to be involved in that tournament or cover it in any way?
I did a little bit of both. So covering it certainly from the journalism perspective. And then I was fortunate enough when I got here and, found people that played tennis, because I was obviously still playing a fair amount. I got involved and I was one of the announcers on Stadium Court. So over the years, I was fortunate to cover some great players and matches as the public address announcer. And you're right. I mean, the tournament was phenomenal. And the one of the challenges, unfortunately, for Indianapolis in that tournament is it's scheduling is so important when you're a tournament the size of Indianapolis. Everybody loved coming here, but it has to fit in the schedule. And I keep making this comparison to golf because it is very similar. It's the same thing with a golf tournament. It's all in the scheduling because the players pick the big tournaments they have to play in. So the Masters Series in tennis. So you talk about Cincinnati. I mean, that is a behemoth of a tournament. And so that's on their list when they're playing over here in the States. And, depending on where those other tournaments are fit into the schedule, and we had been moved around a little bit, that's what unfortunately causes problems from scheduling. But it was a great tournament.
Cincinnati is basically the U.S. Open, but in Cincinnati, but in the Midwest. I mean, all the top players, men and women, and we never
Absolutely.
really had that, as I recall. So you and I have to go to the Cincinnati tournament this year because I try to go every year, but COVID has obviously jacked it up. It's a beautiful facility. They spend a ton of money, and you can see how popular the sport is.
Absolutely. No, people and tons of people from Indianapolis go over there. I mean, every year that I've been, you always end up running into people that, live down the street from you or, you end up
that's right.
here in town.
I want to mention one name, probably the most famous name in the history, perhaps, I think, of Indiana tennis. And that is someone I'm going to guess and maybe if you don't, we're going to move on. And that is Todd Whitskin, a very famous Carmel tennis player who had a terrific pro career, including beating 5-time champion at the U.S. Open, Jimmy Connors, at the U.S. Open.
That's right.
Todd passed away about 20 plus years ago of cancer, a phenomenal athlete. Did you know him at all? Did you get a chance to interact with him or Rick, his brother?
Yeah. So I knew of Todd, but I did not know him personally. I had not moved here to Indianapolis then, but I do know his brother, Rick. Rick is, phenomenal tennis player. In fact, he he was nice enough. You talk about the RCA tournament. We used to do like a celebrity pro-am kind of thing before some of the matches as it got later into the tournament. And so like one year I was fortunate enough to play with Elio Castroneves, who is, I mean, he loves tennis, and he is as passionate and driven about tennis as he is race cars. I mean, he's hilarious. But Linda Cohn from ESPN, you may remember her. You know, I played with her. She and I were doubles partners. And so Rick would always play with us, and we used to joke around that Rick would kind of just put up with us, you know, because we're out there just trying to hit, you know, winners and crazy shots, and he's like, settle down, kids. You know. But Rick, I'll tell you just one thing funny about Rick. It'll be interesting to see if he says something to him, if he listens to your podcast. He is one of and I might mess this up, but he's one of the top pickleball players in the country. Great guy. And he's, you know, still plays a lot of tennis and teaches tennis. And he's taught so many tremendous, you know, junior players. I mean, you could go on and on. Had a great tennis career, but pickleball, he's one of the top players in the country. Pretty interesting.
Pickleball is it's a phenomenon among people of a certain age, and it's not just octogenarians, people who are younger. I play racquetball a couple of times a week, and a lot of racquetball players play pickleball. Do you play?
I play with my family. You know, that's what's nice about pickleball is you can play together as a family. So that's a lot of fun. But mainly I just stick with tennis. But it is a huge, huge sport. I mean, it's everywhere.
Have you gotten a chance to kind of talk about your love of tennis and some of the people you've met with Mark Miles? Mark Miles, the former guest on the Leaders and Legends podcast, was the president of the ATP Tour, the men's professional tennis tour, among his many other amazing career stops. I love talking to him about tennis because I'm a big tennis fan. Have you had a chance to chat with him a little bit?
He has great stories. So he used to, before he does what he does now, he was downtown, worked in the Salesforce Tower where I am. And so, you know, over the years, we've had a chance to talk some about tennis, and he, you know, the stories he has, you know, running the business, it's really very interesting dealing with all those personalities.
The man needs to write a book, as I have told him more than once.
Right.
You went to North Carolina. Were you at North Carolina for any of their basketball national championships, or were you there during the Doherty era?
Yeah. So I just missed Jordan. Although he would come back in the summer. If you remember when he was first drafted, there were a lot of folks that were a little unsure. Bulls fans don't always like to admit that, but they were a little unsure of him in the beginning. And he would come back to Chapel Hill in the summer and practice with the team. So I saw him play in person from a practice standpoint, but not in a game. But yes, I was there when I had classes with Kenny Smith, Joe Wolf, Brad Daugherty was still there, a couple of folks. Yeah, but we did those were not the national championship years.
They were still darn good. They just
it was
to win.
Yeah, our best year was when we ended up. Let's see, what did we got to the Eastern, the finals in the Eastern Conference. We lost to Syracuse. And remember Cycli? He had an unbelievable Ronnie Cycli.
That was 87. That's the year IU won the national championship.
Yep. Yeah, that was. But we had a really good team that year, and of course, Cycli had an unbelievable game. So
we should note, even though we do not post the video on Leaders and Legends podcast, that our guest, Roger Harvey, is wearing a beautiful Carolina blue Oxford.
Every day, Robert. No, not quite every day.
You go to North Carolina, you get your journalism degree. Did you ever waver? Did you ever think about doing something else, or you were laser focused the whole time? And then once you get out of North Carolina, journalists are famous, especially TV journalists, or infamous or renowned, whatever word you want to use, from, hopping from market to market. And that's not a criticism. You're always in search of something bigger or something that fits your family life, perhaps a little bit better. What was your path that led you to Indianapolis?
Yeah, so at Carolina, they've got a tremendous journalism school. So I was fortunate to be a part of that. And while I was there, I had a couple of very strong internships with TV stations. And one person in particular who does some sideline reporting for CBS to this day in basketball, especially during March Madness, was the local sports anchor. And for whatever reason, he took me under his wing and helped me. And basically, I had a tape, a professionally done resume tape. And in television, it's not so much the resume on paper. It's they want to see what you look like, what you sound like. And he got me on the set of the station, recorded an entire sportscast, and had a phenomenal tape. And was basically, I got a job before I got out of college, which is really unheard of. It's hard to break in to begin with. And if you do break in, you're breaking into, hopefully the Fargo Chamber of Commerce isn't listening to this, but it's going to be a real small market. Mm-hmm. And my first job, I was lucky, was in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, which is not a bad place to start. They pay in sunshine, Robert, but it's a good place to. And I must say, I do need to give a shout out to a guy that was a couple years older than me at Carolina who helped me. He was actually at that station and was going to take another opportunity and gave me the heads up that there was an opening. And a lot of your listeners are going to know who it is. It's Stuart Scott from ESPN. Great guy. And he helped me get into that first station when he was leaving that station to go to another opportunity. Back then,
you actually anticipated my next question, because based on his love of Carolina and the era of sports that he would talk about on Sports Center, my guess is that you were contemporaries. Did you stay in touch with him and reach out to him during his sickness?
Yeah, I did. The last time I saw him actually was at a party here back when we hosted the Super Bowl, and spent some time with him then. That was the last time I was with him in person. But great guy, just full of energy, and like I said, he helped me tremendously get into that first job in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. And so I got there. I'd only been there a couple of months, and you know how it works, Robert. News is big opportunities usually happens when something bad's going on. And there was this hurricane that was brewing, that was coming to the Carolinas. They didn't know exactly where it was going to hit, but lo and behold, it hit right where we were, Hugo.
Really?
And so I did some live shots for stations across the country, and for ABC at the time. I was an ABC affiliate, and that got me to Richmond, Virginia. They saw me and they're like, if he's dumb enough to stand out there covering that hurricane in South Carolina, maybe he'll come to Richmond, Virginia. And so that's how I got to Richmond, Virginia. That was my next move.
You get in a situation where you have to choose, like, I need to do sports, I need to do weather, I need to do politics. As a TV person, where you kind of say, this is going to be my area of concentration and I'm all in on X? I
think you can try to do that, but the reality is you're going to go where the opportunity is. I think most people would do that. For me, news was just an opportunity that presented itself right from the beginning. So, the sports that I covered over the years, I was fortunate enough to go to the Olympics in Australia in 2000 and cover that, but it was mainly covering it from a news perspective. Back when the Pacers made those runs in New York, at the Garden, I covered those, but it was the news side of it, covering the fans and so forth, not necessarily as a sports reporter. Do you ever wish you had made it to ESPN? There's a very thin ESPN connection to the Leaders and Legends podcast, and that is someone whom I'd love to have on the podcast, and her name is Jill Fredrickson, whose locker was 2 down from mine at Thomas Carr Howe High School. So maybe one day we'll get lucky and have her come on. I think Dana Hunsinger Benbow did a feature on her in the Star, but Jill's a brilliant member of a beautiful, wonderful Irvington family. But do you ever look at ESPN or maybe, Worldwide Wrestling or some other, delightful sport and go, man, you know what? I really could have done a terrific job as a play-by-play person for ESPN or something like that. I always enjoyed news. I mean, there were a couple of times when unique situations would present itself that I'd have to fill in and do the sports on an evening newscast, but doing play-by-play is a whole different ball game than talking about highlights. And highest score wins in a sports part of a newscast. So I always enjoyed the news, but I have a lot of friends that are in the sports world, and it's a lot of fun. There's a tremendous amount of travel. I don't know that people realize just how much you're on the road in that world.
You are listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast presented by Veteran Strategies, a local veteran public relations enterprise, and sponsored by Girl Scouts of Central Indiana, Garmon Construction, Leaders and Legends LLC, the Grand Hall and Conference Center at Historic Union Station, the McGinley's Golden Ace Inn, and McAllister Machinery, your friendly neighborhood Caterpillar dealer. Our guest today is Roger Harvey, former TV reporter for WTHR, and now he works at Bose Public Affairs Group. And not only does he work there, he is a managing director of strategic communications, and simply put, at the apex of what PR people do for a living here in Indianapolis. Roger, is there a particular Hoosier leader or legend you admire most?
I don't know if there's one. There's certainly folks that I see around that have impressed me, especially someone that's not from Indianapolis. So I've been here a fair number of years, but a name that comes to mind when I look at all that he has touched and been involved with, and he's been extremely nice and helpful to me, is Jim Morris. I would put him probably up there at the top of folks that I've had the opportunity to be around. Really a tremendous person.
He is by far the most frequently cited Hoosier leader or legend, and we were lucky enough to have him on the podcast as well, a couple of times actually. You come to Indianapolis and you disappoint all your friends, and you decide to move to the Hoosier State. You've covered some terrific stories, big stories, not only here, but around the world. Are there two or three? Let's start within Indiana. Are there two or three within the Hoosier State that stand out to you still?
Yeah, there are a few. For me, I get asked this question a fair amount, and for me, it's the ones. It's the stories that are tremendously personal. And one quick story: I ended up going to interview a single mom in a neighborhood on the South Side, and she was going through some tough times. And the story was about infant mortality, and unfortunately, she had lost a child. But I walked into the apartment, and on the walls, Robert, are all these pictures and paintings clearly done by kids, and their certificates. They're all framed, 100% attendance for this child and this child. And it's just basically a room full of accolades for her kids. And that really stood out to me. Not only she lost a child, but the children that she had and was raising, what a positive influence she was trying to be around them. And it stood out to me, and I did some things to help that family out over the years, because I felt like she was working really hard. And so that's the kind of story. It just aired one time on the air, and probably no one remembers it, but those types of stories about real people dealing with challenges and how they overcome it, those things stand out to me. In terms of a story that, would resonate or people would remember, probably the biggest one that I can certainly think of is, 9/11. When that happened, I was working here at Channel 13 at the time, and got sent right away to New York City. And I was born in the city, so I was from there and have a lot of family and friends there. And covering Indiana Task Force 1, which is our group of first responders out there, was a tremendous opportunity, seeing what those folks had to go through as they were trying to help people.
Going back to the first story you shared, I don't know how many times you've been interviewed. I've been interviewed more times than I can count, hundreds, I would guess at this point. And, most of the interviews, I think all of them are on the street, in your office, every once in a while I would ask to get interviewed outside St. John's Catholic Church after I left Mass, thinking that gave me more credibility. Whether it did or didn't, I don't know. But most of them are in somewhat sterile professional environments. But when you walk into someone's home, how different is that?
Well, it's very different, at least for me, on a couple of fronts. Number one, you're in an area that's very personal, right, and usually private to them. And then when you layer on top of that the topic that we were talking about, which was, her losing a child, and the only reason why she agreed to do the interview was because she was trying to help other people be aware of signs of things that they need to do to make sure they stay in good health so that they don't have that problem. It's a tremendous weight that you carry into those situations, and you want to be respectful and you want to do the right thing. And I don't know that people always understand that when they watch a news story. It's all packaged up and you see it. No one really, I think, gives much thought to all the logistics of how that all happens and how you have to be personable and understanding and show empathy and just be a good person, right? To try to tell a story and make people comfortable to talk about something that's very, very horrible and oftentimes tragic that's happened in their life.
It seems the reporters who have some of the best stories best to be used respectfully are the crime and public safety reporters. You think of Jack Reinhardt, who started working in this market in the 70s, right? Did you cover many crime scenes? And, when you did, how did you handle that? Because there's a rawness there that can't be ignored or faked.
Oh, you're exactly right. I will. I'll tell you, Robert. It's probably no different than people that have served in the military and have been actually in war zones. I've unfortunately seen a lot of different ways people leave this earth in person, and there are times over the years, a couple of horrible ones in South Carolina and Virginia that it's. From time to time, I think about those situations, and you'll never forget it. And beyond that, what you try to do, even when I was, fortunately, I was not the crime reporter here in Indianapolis, but you end up covering these things from time to time, and you've got to try to talk to these folks, and those are some of the toughest interviews you'll ever do. Is talking to people when they're going through literally one of the worst times of their life, if not the worst time.
And so how do you, as a reporter, we all see whether it's portrayed in the movies or happening live, where let's just stick to TV reporters for the moment, are shouting questions, sticking the microphone in the face of whomever. And it seems that the movies tend to portray the media as this intrusive, selfish sort of, we're entitled to the story. You must talk to us. Am I far off in that characterization? I mean, I could mention several movies, obviously, whether it's some Dirty Harry movies where the media comes off poorly or some others.
Right.
Of course, there's always Absence of Malice. That was a newspaper reporter, as I recall. But anyway, how do you handle that? How do you decide how far to push? And do you think that the media, the TV reporters, get a bad rap because they're just doing their job?
Well, I think, obviously the movie side of it is the entertainment side, right? And conflict is always, you think of some of those movies you're talking about, there's conflict. There's the black hat, right? There's the bad guy and there's the good guy. And so, what I would say in the real world, if you will, when it comes to covering, if you're talking about crime stories, I don't think reporters act that way at all in those types of stories. Now, where you might see some crossover is if, a law enforcement official is not being forthcoming with information, or if there's an internal investigation or, things like that. It's a little bit different in terms of covering public safety, where it's the official that's maybe reporters are being aggressive with. But certainly I never saw a situation where people were being aggressive in that way with folks that have experienced a loss.
So when you're watching the movie Die Hard, where every member of the news media in the movie is treated like an abject idiot, do you just go, all right, I get it? Or do you get a little riled up?
I can't defend everybody, Robert. It reminds me of a conversation I had many years ago with the Marion County Sheriff at the time, Jack Cotty, who told me I was doing a story. I don't know. It's the third or fourth high-ranking person that had gotten in trouble with the sheriff's department. And it was like a routine. This is like the third or fourth time in a month I'm in his office talking to him about it. And I sat down. He says, Roger, he says, there's one thing I've learned in my years in law enforcement. He said, everybody has their 3%, meaning that, no matter what the profession is, you're going to have a certain percentage of knuckleheads. And so, not everyone has the best of intentions.
But it seems that
the majority do.
It seems like the media is an easy scapegoat sometimes, and other times, like any other profession, a legitimate object of criticism. When you go into a profession that's as high profile as journalism, is that something that you have to think about? I mean, it's like putting your name on a candidate paper and you decide to run for Secretary of State or, president, attorney general, governor, whatever. There are a lot of really good people who don't make that leap.
Right.
Because they don't want that scrutiny. And so as a TV reporter, knowing that you're going to be of the news, but potentially could be in the news, do you think that deters certain people and say, you know what the hell, I'll write a column instead?
Oh, absolutely. I think, first of all, the media world, if you will, the landscape is much different now than it was, back when I started in this media business. And I hate to sound like the person, back in the day, I walked uphill both ways to school, but there is a little bit of truth to that now when people consume media, they consume what they want to hear, right? I mean, it's so fragmented. Most people are not interested in learning about another person's perspective. They want to be in their echo chamber and they want to hear what their view of the world is. And so that does create some of those challenges you're talking about. And, there's not just 3 television networks anymore. And so there's a lot of players. And then there's lots of folks that are not necessarily traditional journalists in terms of, working for someone that's putting out a paper every day or a television station reporter that's, doing 3 or 4 newscasts. With technology, I mean, the drill. Everybody's a journalist. As long as you have a phone that can record video, you're a journalist because you can cover things and post things. So that's probably part of what causes some of that. Every year there's the study that talks about some of the least trusted professions, or however they want to phrase it. And reporters and politicians are usually fairly close together.
We are talking with Roger Harvey, a principal with the Bose Public Affairs Group, managing director of strategic communications. In a previous life, he was an Emmy-winning journalist at various stations, including our own WTHR. I want to go back to something you mentioned, and then we're going to talk a little public relations before you get the 5 questions. And that is 9/11. Wasn't that long ago that I was in New York, and then, you watch television, whether it's Law and Order or, hell, it could be Kojak, right? And there are the Twin Towers. And my brother, who's an airline pilot, called me on 9/11 that morning and said, you're not going to believe it. Some idiot just flew into the World Trade Center. I was working at the State House at the time. And my first question to him was, because he had flown into New York City, more times than he could count at that point. And I said, is it rainy? And his response was, it doesn't matter. As soon as you make the turn to go up, up Manhattan, he goes, you can see him forever. And then literally, like within a few seconds, the second one was hit. As a native New Yorker, watching that unfold and then seeing the reaction among New Yorkers as they fought back and came together. How did that affect you? Yeah,
well, certainly being back there covering that when I, was born there and have been there many times over the years, growing up, seeing family and friends, it did have a different perspective for me. I think probably as I look back on that, obviously myself and hundreds of other journalists were there covering various stories. But the one thing that stands out to me might be of interest to you, Robert, and the listeners is I remember one day. So the convention center, the Javits Center, was the staging area for all the task force teams from around the country. And Indiana is very fortunate. We have one of the biggest and best task force, but there's other states that have really strong ones too. And so they all get to know each other because when there are these disasters, they're all together when they go cover hurricanes and so forth. And so I was talking to one of the other states that was next to the Indiana folks, and he was telling me about how when they had gone in to relieve another team, he said, boy, it was just amazing. You could just see the look on their faces. And I said, being a reporter, I said, well, where is that exactly? Like, is there a point where you guys actually pass in the street? And he goes, oh yeah, it's down here. He pulled out a map and showed me. So I told my camera person, I said, all right, that's where we're going. Tomorrow morning, we're going there. We're going to camp out at that cross point where you have people that have worked a 12-hour shift, covered in soot and debris, and have seen the worst things they could have possibly seen in their life, are walking out of there with no energy whatsoever. And in coming the other way, headed south, is the fresh crop, if you will, of people that have just gotten there in their freshly pressed shirts and, outfits, and they pass each other. And what does that moment look like? And so that's what we did. And we were fortunate to get a tremendous story that we were lucky, won some nice awards, but also more importantly, just told the story of how you had two different perspectives, and they would literally meet in the street, and then lining up on the sides of the street, Robert, were all kinds of locals, if you will, New Yorkers waving American flags, and people that had baked food and were handing food out as they were walking past each other. It was something I'll never forget. It really stands out to me.
So when you went back there after having covered it, and you looked down to the battery, mm-hmm. and they were gone, how did you feel?
Yeah, I've been back several times since. I have yet to go through the museum. I hear wonderful things about it.
It's off the charts. It's an amazing
I just don't know
place.
That. What stands out to me when I go back is for folks that know the area, there's a small fire station right there on the diagonal, and there's now a large mural. It's very nice what they've done, but just seeing those folks there, and just remember being down there off Church Street in that area. It's hard to believe. But one thing is, New Yorkers, and I know it's almost a borderline cliche, they really are resilient. They're tremendous folks. I mean, that is a city unlike any other place. And it is surreal every time I go back, especially now since I've been back with my family, and it's even more surreal then.
I remember reading a story, a contemporaneous story on the attacks that tried to accurately describe the massiveness of the World Trade Center, the towers, and that the towers combined had more office space than the entire downtown Indianapolis and it's not close. Like, my brother said at the time, he goes, you don't realize how big they are. Of course, he's flying over them, but he goes, as soon as you make the turn, like, you can see them, they're gigantic. There's no way it was an accident. And I don't know anyone who lived there really at the time. I wish I did, just to try to get a better idea of what they went through. But covering it as a journalist and also as a native son, did you feel like you had some license to tell whatever story you wanted to do? And if it was a little more emotional than perhaps, they taught at journalism school, then that was just okay?
Yeah. And I always looked at it. I looked at it through the lens, and I was fortunate to have some wonderful people teach me along the way. I've been told many times that I was a very strong storyteller. And like I mentioned to you, I was fortunate to win some wonderful awards. Little old Indianapolis competed against, and still to this day does. This isn't something I just did, but that station is known for winning national awards. It really is amazing what THR has done in this market. But that all being said, part of what I try to do when I go to these situations is not cover. The phrase I always use is don't out cover the network, meaning that, the network is going to cover the big picture, and they're going to get Giuliani, and they're going to get the police chief, and they're going to get all those people. Don't even mess with that. You want to find the best local story. It's like the example I gave you. Get to that flashpoint. No one had done that story, of where these people were actually intersecting, and get the real people story side of it. And that's what I used to always try to do. And that's what I did there. And fortunately with the Indiana Task Force One, there's some wonderful people on that team. So it was quite honestly easy in that regard, just following those folks around, because it was really tremendous what they did.
Chief Brown's been a friend for a long time.
Yeah.
He's as good as it gets.
Oh yeah. I was, just as a side note, I was down, I guess the statute of limitations is passed now. So, but I was down covering Katrina. That was the last story I cut. My whole journalism career was bookended by hurricanes, Hugo and Katrina. And we had run out of gas, and he helped me out. Hypothetically speaking, he helped me out with some fuel for our Ford Explorer.
A little cause and effect story before we move on for a kind of a quick dive into public relations, so you can hear the master at work. And that is Afghanistan. As I've mentioned a few times here on the Leaders and Legends podcast, my son did 2 tours over in Afghanistan. My niece did 1 tour, and very proud of both of them. You were over there. You covered a sweet baby and the surgery. What was it? You were at 9/11. You've been at these disasters. You've seen how people come together. But there really is something special about seeing Americans 8, 9, 10,000 miles away from their home, serving in a country that you could argue maybe has little or no effect on what happens here on a day-to-day basis. But seeing those troops, those Marines and airmen and naval personnel, what's that like when you look at them and go, where are you from? And they say Omaha or Indianapolis or Salt Lake City or Tucson. You're like thinking in your mind, what in the hell are we doing here having this conversation?
Well, first of all, Robert, thank you to your family service, and also to you for serving as well. I will tell you, Afghanistan was probably one of the most challenging situations I've ever been in. I mean, that's a country that, not to go down a history rabbit hole, but has known nothing but war. And so basically the entire country is, from an infrastructure standpoint, is blown up. I mean, the roads don't exist. There's no lane markings. I mean, it's just a free for all. You go wherever. Problem is you can't go wherever, because over the years, Russia in particular and others left landmines behind, and you basically have to stay within the tracks of your tank or your Jeep to have complete assurance that there's not a landmine or an IED or something like that. But it's amazing when you see. To me, the most amazing thing when I was over there covering the soldiers is, number one, just how young. I mean, I remember being part of a group. There was 6 of us. And it's like, who doesn't belong in the photo? I've got a photo of these 6 brave soldiers, and there's an interpreter with us, and then there's me and my photographer. It's like, who's standing out in this photo? That being said, 2 of them in the group, it's the first time they'd been out of the country, Robert, and they're in Afghanistan. Like, they hadn't been to the Bahamas or Mexico or all the places you would think someone would go as a young person for the first time. No, it was Afghanistan. And there he is up there with a 40 caliber, weapon protecting us on top of the Humvee. And it's just talking to those folks. I mean, that this is the only thing they've known about being out of the country, is being in a war zone. And it really is amazing what what our troops go through in those situations. And I have the utmost respect. I tell you, until you've been over there, and I was only there for a small amount of time, but it felt like a lot longer. I think the world of those folks.
Did you think when you were over there about all the television correspondents before you who went to war zones? Not think about it like you were trying to be one of them or anything like that, but just some of the most famous journalists, and let's do radio and TV at this point, really made their bones and got well known by covering war zones. And is that something you were conscious of, or the history that you were aware of, and you were like, I may not be, morally safer in the jungles of Vietnam, but I'm here and I'm damn glad I covered this story?
Yeah. So the short answer is, where I'm going with this, based on your question, is it actually led to me getting out of the news business and doing what I do now. Right before I went over there, Oprah calls it the aha moment. For me, it was more of the fill in the blank moment. My wife was pregnant on bed rest, the end of her pregnancy, with our daughter. Everything turned out fine, but at the time, you're dealing with a crisis in your own sandbox, if you will. And I'm going to Afghanistan because at the time I needed one more international assignment because my next opportunity was with one of the networks. And so that was what my world was going to be, traveling to these hotspots. And right before I left, or shortly before I left, two things happened. David Bloom, a friend of mine at NBC, died over covering the war. And then another friend of mine who I worked with years ago in Virginia, Bob Woodruff, you may recall, he replaced Peter Jennings on World News Tonight. He had part of his head taken off, and he's doing fine. But these things are all happening, and my wife's on bed rest, and now I'm going to Afghanistan. And so, I'm not the sharpest tool in the toolbox, Robert, but I knew when I left to go to Afghanistan, it was probably not one of my better moves on the personal home front. And so, coming back, I pulled out my reporter pad on C-130 transport plane with the 82nd Airborne out of Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and I sketched out this crazy idea to leave journalism and do what I do now. So that's how it happened.
Well, like the superb journalist you are, you transitioned perfectly into the next few minutes of questions before we get to the 5 questions. And we're talking with Roger Harvey from Bose Public Affairs Group. I have to say, and correct my memory, that you were like perhaps the first person I can think of who left journalism to go into public relations. Obviously, there were others, of course. Dave Arlen, our friend, who left WIBC and went to go work for Mayor Hudnut. But you really did kind of start, I hate to say a trend, but maybe an exodus. And when did you start at Bose, and how much fun has it been? Because I know, maybe not all, but I certainly know a significant number of people with whom you work, past or present, at Bose, and they are the top of the very top when it comes to just being very good at their job and being terrific, civic-minded human beings.
First of all, I agree with you 100%. And I was fortunate. A couple of things to your point. There really weren't many, and you mentioned a couple of folks that had left various broadcasting or journalism jobs, but it wasn't that well established, if you will. So I didn't have anyone that I could call up or reach out to with the idea that I had, and so I had to be very, very careful and very discreet, because the one thing about television is, Robert, when they invest in you and they put your face on TV and they want you to be a part of the team. And if they find out you don't want to be a part of the team, you're going to the, the bureau and the outskirts of Alaska. And that's just kind of how it works in the business. So I didn't tell you at the station until I was ready to let them know. And so I was fortunate at the time. Bose Public Affairs Group was actually Bose Tracy. And there were some folks that were here. It was primarily a government relations firm that I thought very highly of. And I went to them and I said, hey, I got this crazy idea. Do you all think it makes sense from your perspective? And fortunately, they said yes. And so the day I came over, we changed our name to Bose Public Affairs Group. And since then, and I know you've done the same thing, you've been very gracious to help people too. Probably between the two of us, I'd say a fair amount of people we've helped get jobs in various places. In fact, I had a television anchor not too long ago tell me they didn't know me at the time. I was already been gone, but they said they had shared with some folks that they were looking to get out of television. They said, you need to call Roger. And he said, he's helped more people. He runs an underground railroad. I said, well, I don't know. I don't know if I'm doing that, but I obviously I help people because who knows, someday I may need help.
Well, when you have a chance to be a pioneer in the market, and I think that's a fair statement for you, you take a chance and it's worked out well for you. And it's a testament to how terrific you are at your job and what a wonderful organization Bose is. And I suppose we can let Michael O'Connor take credit just because we love Michael O'Connor, and that's okay. But there's a lot of people who are involved in your success. And that's one of the things that I think makes you so respected among your peers and people in the industry and people you've helped, whether it's, you and I having lunch outside on Washington Street and our friend Russ Tuttle saying, hey, Roger, how's everything going? Not knowing that I was sitting there at the time. I think that may be one of your favorite moments, Roger, as Russ and I started screaming at each other from a block away. What is when we get together for lunch or whatever, we talk a lot about what we do. And in our final minutes here, are there a case or two or a client or two that really kind of stand out? I know when I was doing the messaging for the public relations for the family of the FedEx shooter, the whole family, you and I talked a little bit because I know that you had so much experience in doing that level of crisis communications. And then what was it like, very quickly, to pitch a story to a former colleague?
Yeah. Well, going back to the first part of your question, I mean, I will tell you, you're very humble. You're tremendous at what you do, and I think one of the things that I do enjoy and take pride in is that you and I oftentimes are put in, very interesting, let's call it interesting situations. And I appreciate having the opportunity to bounce ideas off you. And I think we can share that with your listeners, that you and I try to help each other out the best we can. And I thank you for that. When I look back at what some of the big ones are, I would tell you that probably the biggest one in terms of, I can't imagine a crisis bigger than these, but certainly the school shootings that have happened here in Indiana. And I've handled both of them, the one in Martinsville and the one in Noblesville, and was also involved in the North Central stabbing as well, not too long ago. Those are the high profile ones, right? Those are the ones where the network people parachute in and, try to extract their story as quickly as they can. And, because they're going to go move to the next city tomorrow. Those are high pressure situations. And, you mentioned FedEx that you were involved in. I think you would agree with me that, you can go to all the classes and seminars and get certifications and all that. And that's wonderful about crisis communications and so forth. But until you've actually been there, right, staring at a computer screen, thinking, all right, how am I going to handle this reporter from CNN or pick your national outlet, plus the local reporters, that's a whole different level of experience. And I think you appreciate that too, from your perspective.
Well, your point's well taken. It seems to me that in crisis communications, the most, as the FLAC, as the PR rep, the most important thing that you can do is say no, because, the statement that I sent on behalf of the whole family went out on Saturday, and I had an offer to go on Good Morning America the next day. And CBS News, CBS This Morning Sunday or whatever the heck it's called, the next day. And you just have to say no, because it's about the client. You're thinking, wow, boy, this could be great for my career and this is exposure and so on and so forth. But in crisis comms, especially, it's even more important to be laser focused on the client's needs and what the client can handle. Because, to your point, Good Morning America is going to know my name on Sunday morning when I do the interview, and they're going to forget it on Sunday afternoon, right? Like I'm immaterial. And
Right.
So being able to resist the temptation to do some sort of all-out media blitz when it's not in the interest of your client is one of the hallmarks of it. And you're right. I mean, your training's in journalism, my training is in history, and so you hope that those avenues of learning come back to help you, especially when it comes to write something, because you have to be so concise and so accurate when you're dealing with situations like that.
And doing it all under pressure. I mean, you don't have the luxury of waiting around a week to package something up with a pretty red bow on it. And the other challenge is, as you touched on, you have to think about who the client is. So, as I mentioned in the school situations, I was working with the school, but yours was a little bit different, your example, because you're working with the family. Mm-hmm. And, it reminds me, some of your listeners may remember several years ago, there was a horrific bus crash, a church on the north side, Colonial Hills Baptist Church, were members of a pastor's family. They were coming back from a retreat. They were killed off of Keystone there near 465. And same type of thing as what you dealt with. There it's really personal from the perspective of that the client is the actual family. And that's a whole nother experience that you have to deal with as you're handling crisis communications.
So the first time you looked at Mary Mills and said, "I got a story for you," did she say, "Go to hell, Harvey, I'm not doing your story"?
I'm trying to remember who the first person was that I would, but I think it was the reaction, whoever it was much like I would have been like, "Oh, here we go. Now we're the salesman." Now, and I'm sure they ribbed me much like I would do them. I mean, I would have expected nothing less. And I'm sure I got the appropriate amount of hazing.
How is the last question before we get to the 5 questions? Because you do this better than anyone. I'm not going to say as well as anyone. You do it better than anyone. There are a lot of us who are in the PR world who come up through politics. And there's a lot of folks who major in marketing and comms in college. And then there's a lot of journalists who have moved on to a different career. But for those of us whose foundation of public relations is political hackery, and I say that as a compliment to the group, how have you done such a good job of maintaining a brand of I won't necessarily work with anyone, but I'm not going to get pulled down into the swamp of political back and forth when it comes to clients?
I will tell you, it's not easy, and it hasn't been easy. It's been a challenge more times than not, quite honestly. And it's just something I've just stayed true to the very beginning of when I started this. There's plenty of good people that handle the political side of things, and I don't have a problem referring, opportunities to those folks. Mm-hmm. But that's just something that I've not allowed myself to get into, because it's just, this. It's so. It's just gotten so ugly, it's scorched earth mentality. And at the end of the day, sure, it might be a client that paid you well, but then you got to go live the rest of the year, doing what you did. And it's just a hard dynamic. And I'd rather not get involved in those things if I can.
I was the communications director for Mike Pence during RFRA, Roger. I completely understand where you're coming from. We have reached the point in the Leaders and Legends podcast where we ask the same 5 questions of all of our guests. Number 1 for Roger Harvey. What was your first job?
My first job was at the Central Park Tennis Center, where I basically swept courts and made sure the mayor was happy when he came out to play doubles. I learned politics at a young age. And great guy, Frank Veltri was his name. Terrific guy. But did that and learned about cash is king, because I strung rackets and taught lessons to the junior kids. And it was a fun run. Enjoyed it.
Next question. What was your first concert that you went to? You paid for it, not going to see Helen Reddy with your parents.
Yeah, no, I did. I was taken by my parents. My mom loved Johnny Mathis, but I did not pay for that. Let's see. First concert would have been Cheap Trick at the Sunrise Musical Theater down in Fort Lauderdale.
That's a pretty good first concert.
Bunny Carlos.
Bunny Carlos.
Oh, yeah.
Question 3. If you could suggest any book for someone to read, which book would you choose?
Wow. I don't know. There's a lot of options there. I actually, you know what? I'm going to go I think I'll go a different route. So when I was looking to make that transition from journalism to what I do now, and all my friends are saying, you're too young to be having a midlife crisis, go buy a motorcycle. I'm like, I gotta read something to help me with this. And I was fortunate enough. Someone told me to read a book. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's called Blue Ocean Strategy. And the purpose or the purpose behind Blue Ocean Strategy, it's about selling and marketing yourself, and how basically a lot of folks, and I'm going to oversimplify it, but the amateurs are all in this cutthroat world. So they're near the shoreline and they're chumming, and that's why it's all red and, muddy, and they're all competing for, the lowest common denominator. And it's just a miserable way to go through building a business. Whereas if you just go out a little bit farther off the shore, now granted, you're not standing on the ocean floor anymore, right? There's some risk, but the blue ocean, less competition out there, more opportunity to be successful. It's a great book, and I apologize to the author for oversimplifying it because it's much more involved than that. But that was a book that helped me in making the transition when, quite honestly, I didn't know what I was doing getting into business from a journalism career.
Number 4, if you could witness any event in history, be there as it happens, which event would you choose?
Oh, wow. I've always liked space growing up in Florida with all the launches that used to happen at Cape Canaveral. And so that was always a part of my life, seeing those things. And they would always be carried on TV. So I guess I would say Apollo 11, walking.
And you were at North Carolina when the Challenger blew up.
Yes.
Correct. That was my senior year in high school. Yeah,
yep.
You were gone by then.
I was in sociology class. I remember it well.
Last question. If you could have dinner with anyone living today, 2 hours off the record, to talk about anything you want, whom would you choose?
So I might be going a different direction on this one too. I don't know what that says about me, but I would say my dad, Robert. My dad passed away, unfortunately, when I was relatively young, and just been out of college for a couple of years. And I'd love for him to see what I made of myself, and hear about my wife and my kids, and that'd be pretty special.
You have been listening to Leaders and Legends, a podcast presented by Veteran Strategies, a local veteran public relations enterprise, and sponsored by Girl Scouts of Central Indiana, Garmon Construction, Leaders and Legends LLC, the Grand Hall and Conference Center at Historic Union Station, the McGinley's Golden Ace Inn, and McAllister Machinery, your friendly neighborhood Caterpillar dealer. Our guest today has been Roger Harvey, former reporter at WTHR and currently a principal at the Bose Public Affairs Group, where he is the managing director of strategic communications, and those titles don't do him justice. He is the absolute best at what he does. He is someone I look up to, and I'm very lucky not only to call you a friend, but also to have you as a guest on the podcast. Thank you very much, Roger.
Thanks, Robert. It means a lot coming from you. I appreciate our friendship.
Thank you very much for listening to Leaders and Legends, brought to you by Veteran Strategies Incorporated. If you want to contact us about this program or our menu of public relations services, please send us an email at robert@veteranstrategies.com. That's Robert at veteranstrategies.com.